Today I will be answering the internet's most searched questions about Mormons, and this video was inspired by Wired's autocomplete interviews where celebrities answer questions about themselves that people commonly Google. I think this is a really great way of figuring out what people want to know the most about anything, specifically today, Mormons. This video will feature a lot of the who's, why's, where's, and what's of the different questions that everyone is asking the internet about Mormons. I tried to add a lot of different search terms just to see what types of questions people were asking. I am an ex-Mormon. I was raised in a very devout Mormon family. I served a Mormon mission. I was married in a Mormon temple. And so I definitely have a lot of experience, but also keep in mind that I will be sharing my answers to these questions with my own point of view. No surprise there. I'll also note that I've done previous videos to cover some of these topics in greater depth, and so I'll be referencing those throughout this video too. Hunker down, brew up some devil's bean juice, and let's get into the web's most searched questions about Mormons. Very common question, who are the most famous Mormons? And there is a surprisingly long list of people who at one point were Mormon, were raised in the Mormon church. I think to me the most famous person who was raised in the Mormon church is Ryan Gosling. Ryan Gosling no longer practices but was raised in a strict Mormon home. Amy Adams was one of 7 children and she left the church, she says, at 11. Christina Aguilera's parents met at BYU, but she has never personally identified herself as a Mormon. Gladys Knight is still a member, and fun fact, I actually watched her perform a concert at a stake center that's like a church building in Kentucky, and I've seen Gladys Knight perform in a Mormon context. Jeanette McCurdy was also raised Mormon. She talks about this quite a bit in her book, I'm Glad My Mom Died. Sounds like her mom was fairly strict on certain aspects of the religion, though they weren't the perfect Mormon family. It also sounds like as Jeanette became more famous, her family distanced themselves from the church and became less Mormon. She no longer practices the religion. Donnie and Marie Osmond are some of the most famous Mormon celebrities. They've been huge proponents of the church, grew up in a huge family, and they're still members today. Aaron Eckhart is one I didn't know, actually. He was a BYU graduate. He served his mission in France, and he said some different things about the church over the years. I would probably say he's kind of a cultural Mormon. It's part of his roots, but he's no longer a strict practicer of the religion. Katherine Heigl's parents converted from Catholicism, and she also was a member, but she no longer practices. Eliza Dushku, also raised Mormon, no longer practices. Brendan Urie, raised Mormon, no longer practices. And I will say a lot of these people, you're definitely welcome to research their own Mormon experience in and out of the church. A lot of them, though, have said that they've left, citing issues with the church's stance on LGBTQ issues. Another common question is Mormon who ran for president. That would be Mitt Romney. He actually had 2 presidential campaigns, one in 2008, one in 2012. Both were unsuccessful. Another very commonly Googled question is why can't Mormons drink coffee and why can't Mormons have caffeine? Coffee is one of the sweetest gifts of leaving Mormonism, and this rule comes from the Mormon health code known as the Word of Wisdom, and you can actually go and read it in Mormon scripture, which we'll do a little bit of today. It's found in Doctrine and Covenants section 89. This is my Mormon version of the scriptures and includes the New and Old Testament, the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, and the Pearl of Great Price. The Doctrine and Covenants, it's basically the early revelations to Joseph Smith given to him for the early church membership. So in section 89, we find the Word of Wisdom, and there is one verse that gives us the rule about coffee, and that is verse 9. You can see in my notes off to the side, I wrote coffee and tea. So it doesn't even say coffee specifically, it just says hot drinks, which so funny. And people will say, okay, well, can I have coffee if it's decaf? And the answer is no, because Mormons actually are allowed to have caffeine, which is funny because you'd think that it was the caffeine element of the coffee that would make it so that you can't have it, because caffeine, it's a little addictive. It gets your blood pressure running. It's a stimulant, but it's not the caffeine. Mormons can have energy drinks. I'll also say it's not the fact that the drink is hot, like I said, because Mormons can have hot chocolate, which is a hot beverage, a hot drink, but it's really just the word coffee. So that is what sets off the Mormon alarm bell. So it's not that it's hot. It's not that it's caffeinated. It's just the word coffee. So growing up, I was not allowed to have coffee cake. We didn't even call our coffee table a coffee table. We called it the living room table. Tea is also included in this, whether the tea is hot or cold. Herbal tea, though, is okay. It's the brewed teas, like green tea and black tea, are not allowed. So I have memories of going to BYU where, you know, maybe you're grocery shopping with your roommates, someone picks up something like matcha, and everybody gets out their phones or goes to consult the computer to ask, is matcha allowed? Because, you know, there's a lot of Googling in my experience that happens as a Mormon, because the rules are very this but not that, and that but not this when it comes to what the hot beverages are referring to. And so ultimately, if you really press a Mormon and say, why can't you drink coffee? Like, what is wrong with coffee if it's not the caffeine? It's just the fact that it's a commandment. So the rule following is to follow the rule to show your faith. It's not necessarily out of logic. They've also updated it to be other addictive substances like vaping or anything that's not listed expressly. Basically, if it's addictive, you're not supposed to partake. Prescription medication is okay. Basically, even medicinal marijuana, some people will take, some active members will take. Basically, as long as it's prescribed by a doctor, it's okay, even though some prescriptions from doctors are way more dangerous than other substances that, like, you know, that you can get from a grocery store. The coffee rule is pretty serious, though, and I think it's why I have embraced coffee as a symbol of my ex-Mormon experience, because if you drink coffee, you are not permitted to go into the temple because you can't get a temple recommend. And if you can't get a temple recommend, then you won't be able to go to the celestial kingdom. You won't live with your family forever in the afterlife. And so really, coffee to me is a huge deal because coffee can keep you from being with your family forever. Joseph Smith, ironically, did drink coffee. He drank wine and beer. Brigham Young used tobacco. And so the early members of the church didn't follow this to the T like members do today. The word of wisdom really didn't become a central focus of the church until around 1919, which is around the time that prohibition was a thing. And that's around the time, too, that it starts getting mentioned and added to the temple recommend questions. And so till the word of wisdom was part of the temple recommend questions, it wasn't treated as seriously, but once it was kind of a prerequisite to entering the Lord's home, then members start making a much bigger deal out of it, and today you'll never really see a Mormon with a coffee cup. Ironically, it does say in the word of wisdom that you are allowed to have wine for the sacrament, which I actually didn't know that until I was researching for this video, or I didn't remember it, which is funny because Mormons only drink water for the sacrament, and you would not be permitted to have wine as part of the sacrament. That would be a huge no-no. Another commonly Googled questions was what Mormons can't eat. There's not a lot of rules surrounding what you can't eat. There's no rule about pork, for example, or anything else. It's really just that rule around drugs, substances, coffee, but there's not any specific rules about what you're not allowed to eat. As you all may remember, I was married very, very young, and when my husband and I first got married, we had no money, which is why I wish I would have known about PDS Debt. PDS Debt is the sponsor of today's video, and PDS provides a service to match you with debt solutions tailored to your financial situation. PDS Debt has customized options for anyone who is struggling with credit cards, personal loans, collections, or medical bills. If you're making payments every month on your debt and your balances aren't going down, PDS has solutions for you. Everyone with $10,000 or more in eligible debt qualifies, and there's no minimum credit score required. In my experience, when you don't really know what you're doing with money, getting into debt is shockingly easy, which is why I'm grateful for a service like this. PDS Debt cares about helping you get out of debt. Save more while paying off your debt in a fraction of the time. Stop waiting and start saving. PDS Debt is offering a free debt analysis, and it only takes 30 seconds. Head over to pdsdebt.com/Alyssa to get yours. That's pdsdebt.com/Alyssa, pdsdebt.com/Alyssa. A huge question I get asked as a Mormon is all about garments. So a very commonly Googled question is, why do Mormons wear garments? These are men's garments, and you can see that there are symbols above the right breast, the left breast. There's a line, the mark that goes above your stomach, and then there's a final mark that is above the knee. Women's garments are pretty similar, and they do come in different fabrics depending on your preference. Mormon garments are also called Magic Mormon underwear. I will say that showing them in a video is considered disrespectful to those who are still part of the faith. I think that it's important to talk about, though. I wore these, like I said, for a very long time, so sharing this is also part of sharing my own story and my own lived experience. And I also feel that if someone would like to join the Mormon Church, they should know what they're getting into. And so that's why I choose to talk about the temple and to show it here on the video. Within the church, garments are called an outward expression of an inner commitment to Jesus Christ. And so members believe that the reason that you wear them is to show your love for Christ and to show that you are remembering the promises that you made in the temple. Adult members are the ones who wear them. They're not worn by children, and not even all adults wear them. It's only if you've done the initiation, the washing and anointing ceremony, and the initiatory, and if you've done the Mormon endowment. And so if you know a member who served a mission, they wear garments. If you know a member who went through the temple to be married, they likely wear garments. But it ultimately is a personal choice if you're going to wear them or not, but you've made a promise to wear them when you went through the temple endowment. In the temple, you're also told that they are a shield and a protection. That protection would be both physical and against evil, and so they're supposed to protect you from bad situations, according to Mormon belief. And growing up, I would often hear stories about how, maybe somebody was in a house fire and all of their arms and legs were burned, but anywhere the garment was covering was unscathed. And so, or you'll hear examples of someone being in a car accident, and anywhere that the garment was covering, they were protected, and anywhere outside the garment was not protective, which by that logic, you'd think they should just wear like clothing that goes above their face and arms and legs, because nobody wants burned arms. As I said, they represent the promises you make in the temple. I will read those promises to you now. There's the law of obedience, which you're going to obey all of God's commandments, the law of sacrifice, you're going to do all you can to support the Lord's work, the law of the gospel, the law of chastity, and the law of consecration, which means dedicating your time, talents, and everything which you possess to building up the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so those are briefly the promises that you make as part of wearing the garment. And when you wear the garment, it's meant to symbolize and remind you from day to day to day that you made those promises. In addition, they're also supposed to represent the coats of skins given by God to Adam and Eve to hide their nakedness. So there is obviously a modesty element. In Genesis 3:21, it says, "Unto Adam and also to his wife did the Lord God make coats of skins and clothed them." So basically, garments are also meant to represent those coats of skins given to Adam and Eve as they were exiting the Garden of Eden. I'll be putting resources to everything I talk about today in the notes below. I do suggest this frequently asked questions about the temple garment is the most faithful facing. It's from the Mormon Church, where they answer these frequently asked questions, and they go into more depth on this page than I've seen them go into on most pages. So if you want to read more from the Mormon Church specifically about the practice of wearing garments, that's a good place to check it out. I've also made my own video going into greater depths about wearing garments. Another common question is, why don't Mormon influencers wear garments? From time to time on my For You page, I'll see a woman who's made a video that includes garment-friendly outfit of the day ideas, and within those comments, it's always a crapshoot because there's people saying, "You're in a cult, watch out." There's also ex-Mormons saying, or you could just not wear them and then wear whatever you want. But then what I find to be crazy is there's also Mormons in those comments who are saying that outfit doesn't actually cover the garments and you shouldn't be promoting this as garment approved in some of the cases. And so that there's always a whole argument going on. And I think that as far as why influencers don't wear garments, it's because I think there's this push and pull between being a good Mormon and wearing the garment correctly. I don't think I mentioned you're supposed to wear it day and night, and the only exceptions are showering, sex, and swimming. And so that's basically all the time. And you're wearing them to bed, you're wearing them when you wake up, and the garments make you feel super frumpy. In college, we would all talk about how the garments make you gain 10 pounds or 15 pounds because you just kind of stop seeing your torso. You're just constantly wearing this white shirt that covers your shoulders and these white shorts that go down to your knees. And a lot of women, I think, struggle with how they feel in their body while wearing those all the time. Another crazy aspect of the garments is that you're asked and reminded to wear them during your temple recommend interview with a male. So if I was going to go get my temple recommend re-upped, renewed, I would have to go and listen about how I should be wearing garments from my male bishop, 60 plus usually. And this is what they say, that the temple garment is a reminder of covenants made in the temple, and when worn properly throughout life will serve as a protection against temptation and evil. The garment should be worn beneath the outer clothing. It should not be removed for activities that can be reasonably done while wearing the garment, and it should not be modified to accommodate different styles of clothing. That's important. I'll read it again. It should not be modified to accommodate different styles of clothing. On the church website, it also says, how is the garment designed to fit? It says that the hemline of the garment bottom is designed to fit just above the kneecap. And a lot of women argue about that line because it does say, and you're instructed, that the garment should go just above the kneecap. So I'll put a diagram here of where that might be. If the garment is worn too short or too tight, the hemlines may feel uncomfortable. And so when these Mormon influencers are wearing something that seems still probably pretty modest by general standards, people will say, you can't wear garments with that, because if the hem of their clothing is above the kneecap, then they are actually not wearing the garment correctly. I think a lot of women in the church face a clash between being told to be beautiful and perfect, but also being told to wear the garment correctly, because especially in today's world, it's hard to do both. It's hard to be really fashionable and look really great and be fitting in with the most current trends while also wearing underwear that goes to right above your knee. Some women will purposefully buy different fabrics because some fabrics stretch differently on your body. And so I had a pair of garments that would go up like to mid-thigh, that if I wanted to wear a shorter skirt, I could wear the skirt while also wearing my garments. And it reminds me of this whole conversation around soaking, and even the conversations around all the other ways Mormons go, all the other lengths Mormons go to get away from these rules while still following them, is because I think ultimately Mormonism is a very rules-based religion that focuses on the rules instead of focusing on the principle behind the rule. And so you'd think that they would just take the garments off so that they can wear the cute skirt, but instead they wear the garment incorrectly while also wearing the cute skirt, and kind of can mentally, I think, say, well, I'm following both rules at once. I'm being pretty, I'm being fashionable, but I am technically wearing the garment, and it's up to my choice if I'm gonna wear it to the knee or if I'm gonna wear it higher. I've also heard a lot of jokes about how Mormon women are always going to the gym or always coming back from the gym, because if you're exercising, you're also not required to wear garments. And so some Mormon women will just wear athletic clothing with the intent, I guess, to go on a run at some point, go to the gym at some point, and that also helps them escape, kind of while also still following the rules. They're allowed to escape wearing the garments all the time because they are gonna they're gonna exercise eventually, or they just got back from the gym and they're gonna take a shower eventually. And so they can wear that more comfortable athletic clothing instead of wearing their garments all day. And so this is all just part of the larger conversation about how I think these women who are influencers. They're beautiful, they want to fit in, they want to be trendy, and they want to still be part of their cultural community, follow the rules. I mean, they've made these promises to wear the garments, and so they kind of toe the line by doing both of the things, but I think that's why they get the criticism, is that you kind of can't say that you're wearing the garment correctly if it's not touching right above the kneecap. And so I think these women at church, they probably get some side eye. They definitely get comments. If you go in the comment section, you'll probably see a comment or two about, where are your garments? Why aren't you wearing them correctly? But ultimately, everybody gets to make their own choice as to how they wear the garment. And when they're in that temple recommend interview and the bishop is reminding them about the standards for wearing the garment, they can basically choose to take that and interpret it however they choose. A common question was, what Mormons wear. I guess the intent behind that is potentially a question about the garments, or just what are the standards for modesty. And as a young girl, I was told that you should dress as a kid to prepare to wear the temple garment, or to prepare to be able to wear your garments. And that's why even younger girls and boys are encouraged to wear modest clothing, dress modestly in a way that will allow for the garment when they're adults, because it's basically training them to have a wardrobe that will allow for them to wear the temple garment someday. There are also rules about how to throw away your garments, which I have always thought was interesting. In the Missionary Handbook, it says you should never leave them on the floor. So that's one rule. It's basically disrespectful to leave them on the ground. And then when you're disposing of them, because they're underwear, and eventually, hopefully, you're going to get some new underwear and replace the old ones. It used to be that people would burn them, but now they've walked that back a bit more, probably because the idea that Mormons are burning their sacred magic Mormon underwear, it doesn't have the best optics. Now you're just told to cut out the symbols and throw them away separately. And so I have memories of my mom, or even what I did when I was a member, of when you're done with your garments, you don't need them anymore, you get out your little scissors and you cut them into little pieces so they cannot be identified, and just throw them away in different trash cans, I guess, to keep the different pieces apart so that nobody can piece them back together and see your garments. Before we continue, just a quick reminder to like this video, subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet. Also a reminder that this video is available early and ad-free on my Patreon if you want to hop over there to get some of those other little bonuses. If you have a question about Mormonism, drop it in the comments below. I also always appreciate my fellow ex-Mormons and even current Mormons who come in to answer some of those questions for people. So if you're thinking a question, drop it and I will do my best to answer. Another Googled question around dress and how you look is, people asked, can Mormon men have beards? And this is a very interesting question because the answer is yes and no. It's a gray area. They are not permitted at BYU. Brigham Young University is the Mormon church sponsored school. You are allowed to have a mustache though. So I guess they said that amount of facial hair is okay. Most men also, in my experience, would shave when they're called to leadership positions. So there might be a man in the general membership who has a beard, and then when he gets called to be in the bishopric, first or second counselor, or the bishop himself, he will shave, because it's kind of a more cultural norm. There's no hard rule about leadership having to shave. If you're called into church leadership, it's more of just something people expect the new leader to do. But at BYU, it is expressly written out as a rule. There are some exceptions for religious reasons. If you are Sikh, for example, you are permitted to keep your beard, or if you have certain medical conditions, you're allowed to keep your beard. One of the greatest ironies with the whole beard conversation is that Brigham Young had a beard. The college's namesake had a beard, huge beard, and Jesus Christ himself also pictured with a beard. Even on the church's logo, Jesus has a beard. So, you know, all of it is a little bit nonsensical if you dig too deep into it. Why could Brigham and Jesus they have beards, but at BYU you can't? But general membership can have a beard, but the leadership is expected to shave, but it's not written down as a rule. So that one is another one of those, like the coffee question, where you almost have to explain a flowchart in order to express what the rule is to somebody else. Along with the question about the garments, I'll answer the commonly Googled question, what is the Mormon endowment? And this happens in a Mormon temple. This is something I participated in many times. I'll put the video off to the side here of kind of what it generally looks like as you're participating in the endowment ceremony. As you go through, you dress in different types of clothing. Women wear a veil, men wear this kind of baker's hat looking thing. You have a shawl and the green apron. This is all still part of the representation of Adam and Eve. And so you start the ceremony with none of the ceremonial clothes on, and then as the ceremony progresses, you add different elements of the clothing to your body. Throughout the endowment, you also make some of those promises I mentioned earlier. You also learn different handshakes, and the different handshakes correlate with the different promises you make. The handshakes all have names. You also do signs with your body. That's why even for me, I have to research a bit before I jump back into explaining some of this stuff, because when there are many different signs and each sign has a token and each token has a symbol, it's just a lot to remember. And so as you kind of go through, you're learning about Adam and Eve, you're learning about these promises. You do something called a prayer circle, which is where you stand in a circle and say, "Oh God, hear the words of my mouth." You stand man, woman, and you put your arm on the shoulder of the person next to you, and with this hand, I would be doing the patriarchal grip. After you go through the whole ceremony, you stand at the veil. You're asked to recite basically a recited prayer to show that you are able to pass through the veil into the celestial room. It's all supposed to be very symbolic. It's also incredibly secretive. You know, I had really no idea the first time I went through what was going to happen. I wasn't familiar with the clothing. I wasn't familiar with what I would be asked to do. They've changed it a bit now, but when I went through, they also, at the very beginning, they say, this male voice comes over the speaker, and it basically says, "If you do not want to make the promises you are about to make, you must leave now. And if you stay, that means that you make the promises." And you're sitting there at the very beginning, just like, by staying and sitting here, I'm saying I'm going to make promises that I haven't even been told what they are yet. I'm just like crossing my fingers there's not going to be a goat sacrifice involved. So to me, when it happened, I felt very betrayed. It's one of the things that I still feel the most upset about, still feel the most it's one of the things I still feel the most upset about. And I've seen people say, why was that so awful? And I think that the level of betrayal is a huge aspect of it, of being raised in this religious tradition with parents and leaders who you trust, and then being totally thrust into this completely alien experience where you're asked to make promises, hold hands with strangers, chant, wear strange clothing, and to feel like none of that was ever told to you. None of that was shared with you. I still, it makes me so sad when I see certain teenagers will come on TikTok videos or on YouTube videos and comment and say, "We don't believe this. You're just making this up. You're making fun of us. You have no idea what we believe as Mormons. This is totally not true." And they will fight tooth and nail to let you know that what you're saying when you present information about the endowment is a lie. And to me, that just shows how secretive this ceremony really is, that teenagers who are fully online and can walk around and talk still are completely left in the dark as to what happens in the temple. I am planning a video on how much of the temple ceremony is similar to Masonry. Joseph Smith was a Mason, his dad was a Mason, his whole family were Masons, and so the connection between Joseph Smith and Masonry is very strong, especially with how he took this temple ceremony that Mormons have, and how he used a lot of what he saw and heard and learned from Masonry and used that in a Mormon temple, and that's what Mormons practice today. So there's a lot of similarities. I'm working on a video about that, so don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss it. Googlers also asked, why can't Mormon missionaries swim? This is the physical version of the Missionary Handbook that I used. They have an updated version. It's mostly the same from what I've read, but I'll link it below if you'd like to read. The exact rule is safety. Recreational activities should be safe. Never go swimming or take part in water sports. Avoid activities that may restrict your physical ability the rest of the week or cause injury. So there are several reasons, I think, for this whole swimming rule. The first is just legal liability. A lot of these rules are there to protect the church from legal mishaps if the missionaries get into something that they shouldn't get into. So I think it's just to make sure that there's no drowning, there's no issue at all with the pool. They're just completely removed from the whole water situation. I also think it's because swimsuits are kind of inherently immodest and sexy, and so they don't want Mormon missionaries dressed in bathing suits going out and going to swim. There are stories of people who serve their mission in California or on an island, maybe in Samoa or in some other beautiful part of the world with a beautiful beach, and they never once put their foot in the water because they're not allowed to swim. The other reason I think for this missionaries can't swim rule is that Mormons do believe that Satan is more powerful in the water. This is something that I was taught growing up, and I have memories of, walking past a lake and staring at the water, almost expecting the devil to rise up out of the water and grab me and take me in. Even I have memories of taking a bath on Sunday and being worried that I was submerged in water on the Sabbath. I'll put some scriptures off here to the side about how Satan is more powerful on the water. Some people disagree with me on this, but I think sometimes when people disagree with me, I think it's just because I was ultimately raised in a very devout household. And so sometimes people will say, that's not true. We don't believe that. And in my experience, it's typically just that when they say that, they weren't raised in as a devout family as me. Plus, the church changes its doctrine all the time. I got a text the other day from a woman who is a bit older than me, who was sharing something with me about the videos, one of the videos I made, sharing information that I wasn't able to find and clarifying the doctrine. And so that's another example of how I don't always know what was taught much further back because like I said, at one point the church, everybody was polygamist. The mainstream Mormon church is not doing that anymore. We're talking about polygamy today, but it just shows that when I say Satan is more powerful on the water, sometimes that's why I add these screenshots to my videos, because people will come in the comments and say, you're lying. And my response is often, you just weren't raised by parents that were as into Mormonism as I was. Lucky for you, honestly. Googlers also asked, why don't Mormons wear crosses? I was taught that wearing a cross, you won't see a cross on a Mormon chapel. There's no crosses on Mormon temples. The reason for that is that Mormons believe that the cross is a representation of the death of Jesus Christ. So it's a representation of his passing and basically this violence that was done to him, and they would like to celebrate the resurrection and Christ as a resurrected, perfected being, and that basically having the cross, I was also taught it's kind of like having an idol, worshiping an idol. I've heard stories of kids ripping, in Utah, ripping the cross off of some new kid that moved in because they say you're not supposed to wear a cross. These are, Mormon myths. I don't know if that's true story or not, but I definitely heard stories like that growing up. The Mormon Church does seem to be altering this stance a little bit. They've recently updated the Google Maps little insignia so that the pin looks like is a cross instead of the angel Moroni. I recently saw a Facebook post of a girl who is on her mission, and she was wearing a cross, and some of the comments were about how I've never seen a Mormon missionary wearing a cross, and she said, I love my cross, it reminds me of Jesus, and it seems to me that generally speaking, the church is moving closer to trying to identify with some of the more common portions, the more common belief systems or ways of observing a more general Christianity. They've also updated their logo to make Jesus Christ quite a bit bigger. They've said don't use the term Mormon anymore to describe us, and they're also now no longer even putting the angel Moroni on temples, which is very interesting. Because growing up, the angel Moroni was a huge symbol for me. Moroni being the one who brings the gold plates to Joseph Smith, which then becomes the Book of Mormon, which is the most correct of any book that's ever existed. And so to me, I was looking at temple open houses coming up, and none of them have the angel Moroni. So they really are stepping back from, I think, a lot of the more obscure, strange, cult-like ways of expressing their faith, like the angel Moroni is just one single example. Embracing the cross is another example. Making sure that people know, hey, don't call us Mormon, call us the Church of Jesus Christ, because we want to be known by his name. All of these things to me are focusing on making an image that is much more centered in Jesus over being centered in a lot of this stuff that historically was originated by Joseph Smith. People ask, why don't Mormon temples have windows? They do often have stained glass windows, which are pretty, and I think it gives them, the stained glass windows allows them to have windows that can't be seen through. I think they try to make up for the no windows thing with better design. A lot of people say they like how to, I think some temples are pretty, some temples are kind of ugly. Kind of depends on which temple, where it's built, and a lot of people just don't like temples because they don't obviously like what it's associated with, whether it's a lovely building or not. Ultimately, they don't have windows that allow you to see through because they are doing, as I was sharing earlier, the endowment ceremony, they're doing baptisms for the dead, they're doing temple marriages. All of those things are very secretive, or what they would say is very sacred, so no one is supposed to see it, and that is why temples don't have windows. One thing that I think it's important to address as we're talking about the process of Googling about Mormonism in general is that it is pretty difficult to find information that you feel you can legitimately trust. Mormons and ex-Mormons, obviously I'm an ex-Mormon, and have very different interpretations of a lot of church history, a lot of the doctrines of the church, and the church doesn't always, in my opinion, add everything to its narrative. And so if you Google something like Black people and the priesthood, you will see there's, of course, the LDS, the Mormon article that explains how that all shook out. There is a Wikipedia page which explains how it all shook out. And then there's probably going to be some ex-Mormon resources as well, or maybe a resource from a general Christian group, a Catholic group. And so that's a lot of voices that are all competing for the prize of saying we are right and you should listen to us. In my experience, Wikipedia is the easiest place to start. I think it will also sometimes say at the top of Wikipedia, this page is disagreed on. Different parties say this page should be edited in different ways. And so I like Wikipedia not just because it's mostly impartial and doesn't have as much bias, but also, and if you're ever looking at a Wikipedia page that I link to, I always suggest make sure you scroll down, look at the original references. First-hand documents are always the best place to find information as much as is possible. Wikipedia is ultimately still just a jumping off point. And I think when interacting with content about Mormonism, but really about everything, any information you consume, I think it's helpful to ask, what is the intent behind the content? So something like, if I see, Catholic.com, truths about Mormons, obviously I know that their approach to this is going to be to disprove Mormonism from the perspective of the Catholic faith, to ultimately boost the view of the Catholic faith, and to use Catholicism to break Mormonism into little tiny pieces and say this is why it's not true. The same would go with some, evangelical or non-denominational Christian interpretation of Mormonism. If the website has a clear intent, I think it's important to note that that is the way that they are going to interpret the events. Same goes for Mormon content. There's a Mormon Apologist website called Fair Latter-day Saints that I've used a few of their screenshots. And the Mormon and the Mormon Apologists, their intent is to give this information with as faithful a perspective as possible. And so in my experience, when you look at and research things from the Mormon perspective, that's where you're getting the most sanitized view of things, and that's where you're getting kind of the most carefully worded, faith-promoting versions of events. As far as Mormon apologists, they do dig more into some of the concerns about the church, about the racist past, about polygamy. They will talk more openly about Joseph Smith's many wives, but it is still with a faithful interpretation and often with the intent to break apart the arguments that ex-Mormons often hold up against the church. The same, though, can be said for my content. Obviously, I'm an ex-Mormon, I'm a critic of the church, and so in the same way that every other source should be taken with a grain of salt, and you should analyze the intent behind the content, do the same for my videos too. And I hope that anybody who consumes any information that I share verifies it, looks at sources that oppose it, looks at other narratives, because that's just media literacy. And I think that sometimes we struggle with that as a society. And so I mention all of this just to say that when you are Googling about the Mormon Church, and you see the cascade of different links to click and different opinions, it's important to ask yourself, what is the intent? Is this a first source, a primary source, a secondary source? Is it trying to convince me of one sort of way? Is the argument convincing? Because sometimes you do want to be convinced one way or the other. Sometimes you're just looking for information. And so all of that should be considered as you're Googling, as you're consuming not just my content, any content on the internet, not just to consume the information or consume the words, but also to ask yourself, what is the intent behind this content? And if I understand that, how does that help me process the information that's being conveyed through the medium? Let's talk about where the Mormon religion originated, another common question. Mormonism originated with Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith was a man who was involved in treasure digging. He would use stones to try to see treasure in people's fields. He lived in New York. He was raised by people who also did similar kind of mythic early practices of mysticism. And along the way, he said that he had a vision that there were gold tablets and that an angel wanted him to get those gold tablets. He said the angel led him to the gold tablets, and he was able to translate this historic record that was on the gold tablets written in Reformed Egyptian, and that is what he translated into English, which we now know as the Book of Mormon. This is the beginning of the church. Joseph Smith's first vision, he says, happened in 1820 when he was just a boy, and the Book of Mormon was published in 1830, so 10 years later, and the church was officially founded and organized in 1830. And so that is kind of the very beginning of Mormonism. He sees a vision. God tells him none of the religions on earth are true, and that God is calling him, just like God called prophets of old to be the prophet who will restore Jesus Christ's true church with Jesus Christ's authority back to the earth today. Throughout these years of the Book of Mormon being published and the first vision, and then later on in his life, there are so many different instances of him, being in trouble with the law, being caught in lies. He used many people. I was always taught that Joseph Smith translated the Book of Mormon by having the gold plates and basically reading the Egyptian out loud, but reading it in English as a translation while someone else off to the side is writing the words. What's more accurate is that he put his special rock that he had in a hat. He put his face in the hat. I'll use my psychedelic Joseph Smith hat to illustrate. So he put his rock in the hat, and then he put his face in the hat so that there was no light remaining, and then he was able to translate the Book of Mormon. Often they said that the gold plates, weren't even in the room. Almost no one ever saw the gold plates. He had some witnesses. Most of them were his close friends or blood relatives. And even those people said that when they say they saw the gold plates, they saw them with their spiritual eyes, in the sense that they, I guess, believed strongly that they did exist. And so because they believed so strongly that the plates existed, they did, in fact, see the plates physically. And so the whole narrative between Joseph Smith as, a con man and a predator, that's kind of the ex-Mormon view of Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith as a prophet and a martyr and a seer and a revelator, which is what I was raised to believe him to be. That's a whole other depiction of Joseph, and where you land between those two is kind of up to the individual to decide after doing your own research and, I suppose, praying to ask for yourself. So people also asked, how did Joseph Smith die? He died at age 38. Basically, some of his opponents, people who were against him, who also many were former members, started a printing press to basically publish all these negative things about him. One of the primary things being about polygamy. Joseph Smith, ordered it to be burned by a mob of believers. He was then incarcerated because he destroyed this property. While he was incarcerated, an angry mob killed him and his brother and a few others while he was in Carthage jail. I have actually been to Carthage jail. My family was so Mormon that we went on, instead of going on normal vacations, which we did some of that too, but a lot of our vacations were basically pilgrimages to these Mormon religious sites. And so I've been to Carthage jail. When I went, they still had the bullet hole that is in the door from one of the guns going off, and I put my finger through the hole, and when I went, they had us go stand at the window that Joseph Smith fell out of after being shot. And I remember the tour guide crying, my mom crying, I'm pretty sure I teared up, and just picturing getting shot to death and falling out of a window. So that was my vacation as a child, and as a kid, you're definitely taught to view this death of Joseph Smith as the death of one of the greatest human beings that's ever lived. It was a legitimate martyrdom, a religious martyrdom of an innocent man. Many people who are opponents say that he was basically getting what was coming to him for marrying all of these underage girls, marrying women who were already married to other men, and doing a lot of other shady stuff with money. There was a bank failure involved in all of this. And so that is how Joseph Smith died. People also Google, where are the gold plates? That is a common question I get asked whenever I talk about the Book of Mormon. Mormons believe that the angel Moroni, who I mentioned earlier, Angel Moroni is the one that led Joseph Smith to the plates, and that the angel Moroni essentially came back. This is Moroni burying the gold plates to begin with. It's, in the Book of Mormon. This man is the one that told Joseph where to get the plates to begin with. And this man, who is a Native American, apparently, is also the one who took the gold plates back once Joseph was done translating them. To be clear, there has never been any archaeological evidence to prove definitively that the Book of Mormon is, in fact, a nonfiction record of the Native Americans from long ago, but that it is merely a a fabrication, something written in the 1800s by Joseph Smith. I'll include in the links below the link to the Smithsonian Institute, which has issued a statement on the Book of Mormon. It says, "The Book of Mormon is a religious document and not a scientific guide. The Smithsonian Institution has never used it in any archaeological research, and any information that you've received to the contrary is incorrect." They then go on to have a few other pages going line by line as to why the Book of Mormon is not a nonfiction record of the Native Americans, but that it is a fabricated book, fabricated story written by Joseph Smith. Some of those statements include iron, steel, and glass and silk were not used in the New World before 1492. No reputable Egyptologist or other specialist on Old World archaeology and no expert on New World prehistory has discovered or confirmed any relationship between archaeological remains in Mexico and archaeological remains in Egypt. American Indians had no wheat, barley, oats, millet, rice, cattle, pigs, chickens, horses, donkeys, camels before 1492. Smithsonian archaeologists see no direct connection between the archaeology of the New World and the subject matter of this book. And so they have 8 points that they write out as to why they don't view the Book of Mormon as a historic record, and I will link those below if you'd like to read all of them for yourself. Another very common question that people Google is, are Mormons Christian? And to me, as an atheist, I have always felt like this question is kind of splitting hairs a bit, because ultimately the kind of squabble between who gets to be a Christian and who doesn't get to be a Christian, to me always is, it's just not a conversation that feels personally relevant to me. It's a little tomato. You'll find the same Google questions about every religion. Are Catholics Christians? Are Baptists Christians? Are XYZs Christians? And it's an argument that feels to me completely dominated by who gets to be the right religion and who falls outside of that. I found several Reddit threads of people going and asking, are Mormons Christians? Some say they are, some say they aren't. It's really a question to me of definition. How do you define a Christian? If you ask a member of the Mormon Church, they will say they are Christians because they believe in Jesus Christ, and that's what makes a Christian, is someone who worships Jesus Christ. If you go to other resources, though, they'll say that because Jesus Christ is not part of the Trinity, Mormons don't get to call themselves Christians. I have always thought that Mormons' desire to be included within this Christian conversation is kind of funny and ironic to me, because when Joseph Smith had God and Jesus Christ appear to him, they told Joseph Smith that all of the other churches were false, that they draw near to me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They're an abomination. I think they just want to be included because being included feels good, and they don't want to feel like they are weird, while simultaneously claiming to be a peculiar people. So it's a little bit like a lot of these things. They want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to be Christians, but they also want to be exceptional and kind of better than Christians because their church is the true church. Another question in line with this Christianity question that people Google is, will Mormons be saved? And I think this is similarly, it just depends on who you ask. I've been asked throughout my life, are you saved? And that obviously is a question that's saying, have you accepted Jesus Christ as your personal savior? And that's a pretty common question to be asked by more mainstream Christians. Are you saved? They want to know if you've accepted Jesus Christ. And Mormons don't ask that question. The terminology of being saved is not really present in Mormonism. If you ask a Mormon, they'll say yes, but kind of renegotiate the conversation to say, I'm saved because I've been baptized and because I've been through the temple. Along with that, Mormons believe that everyone has to be baptized as a Mormon and receive the Mormon endowment in order to go to the celestial kingdom, which is the highest of the 3 levels of Mormon heaven. And so if you asked a Mormon, are you saved? The Mormon would probably be thinking in the back of their head, I know I'm saved, but I actually think you're not saved because you have to be baptized as a Mormon in order to go to the celestial kingdom. However, Mormons do believe that in the afterlife, there will be another opportunity for everyone to accept Mormonism, which I think is ultimately a more compassionate doctrine than some Christian doctrines where when you die, you're just, whoop, that's it. That was your only chance to accept Jesus. But Mormons believe there will be many different opportunities, which I don't believe believe in any of it, obviously, but I do think that the underlying idea that people get lots of chances even after death to accept Jesus is ultimately a more compassionate doctrine than a lot of Christian doctrines that exist. Next question is, are Mormons polytheistic? So polytheistic is basically having many gods. That's what that word means, having more than one god that you worship. And the answer to this question is yes and no again. It's another question of semantics. Basically, how do you choose to define God? How do you choose to define one God? If you go on the church's website, they'll say they are not polytheistic because God is Heavenly Father, and that we being the Mormon Church, we only pray to one God. He's the God in heaven. He's the Father of our spirits, and that is the God that we worship. However, Jesus Christ is also considered a God, and Jesus Christ, in a bodily sense, is fully separate from Heavenly Father. And so that's already, you got two gods right there. And then the Holy Spirit is a third entity. And so that means now we have three gods, and the Holy Spirit doesn't have a physical body. It's just the Spirit. There also is talk of Heavenly Mother, because if we are the Spirit children of God, then there needs to be a God mom, and a daddy God, and those two got together to make those spirits, which are us, as their babies. In a previous video, I sang "If You Could Hide to Kolob," which does talk about the gods. It has an S, multiple gods. But there is another song called "Oh My Father," which does include a conversation about Heavenly Mother. So I will sing that for you. When I leave this frail existence, when I lay this mortal by, Father, Mother, may I meet you in your royal courts on high. So dear Heavenly Mother and dear Heavenly Daddy, can I meet you up in heaven? And then this is another verse. This is actually verse 3. I just sang to you verse 4. Which mentions her again. This song is a little high, and it's also it reminds me of like a funeral song, but we're gonna sing it anyways. In the heavens our parents single, no, the thought makes reason stare. Truth is reason, truth eternal, tells me I've a mother there. I am not the best singer, but I am committed to sharing the doctrine with you. So on the topic of if Mormons are polytheistic, so far we have Father God and Mother God. We have Jesus as a God and the Holy Spirit as a God. And in addition to Mormons believe that if they are righteous, one of the things that you're promised in the Mormon endowment ceremony is that you will become a king or a queen to rule and reign with God in the afterlife. And so that means basically that Mormons believe they will be perfected to become like God, in that they will become gods themselves. And that also means that we're adding more gods to the list of who gets to say that they are God. Which is why I would say Mormons are ultimately polytheistic. They would say, though, that as human beings, we don't pray to Heavenly Mother. We don't pray to Jesus Christ even. We pray in Jesus' name to Heavenly Father. So still just one God to worship, but that doesn't mean there aren't other gods. Another common question is, are Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses the same? The answer is no, but there are some similarities. You'll see both Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormon missionaries going door to door to knock. Both originated in the 1800s, with the Jehovah's Witnesses originating in 1870s with Charles Russell, and Mormonism originating in the 1830s with Joseph Smith. So similar time periods. Both believe in the Bible. Jehovah's Witnesses are much more focused on the Bible as they're the only religious texts. Mormons, obviously, as I've said, also add the Book of Mormon, the Pearl of Great Price, and the Doctrine and Covenants alongside the Bible as religious texts. They both also have their own version of the Bible. The Jehovah's Witnesses have their own Bible. And even though Mormons use the King James Version of the Bible, they also, I'll show here, use footnotes that are from the Mormon Church. So you can see here how they are using the footnotes from the Book of Mormon, from the Doctrine and Covenants, to show this different doctrine down in the footnotes of the New and Old Testament. And so in many ways, even though they use the King James Version of the Bible, they are still kind of rearranging it a bit so that it is aligning and matching up a little bit more closely through the footnotes, through some edits on the chapter headings, so that it aligns with Mormonism. My next question is, will the Mormon Church survive? Which is such an interesting question. Really, across the whole United States, religion is on the decline. It's also really hard to know the truth because so much of religious statistics are just self-reported. And so if the Mormon Church is self-reporting numbers, we have to ask, who's included in this? Is this tithe paying members? Usually it's just the total roster. How active are the people that they're claiming? On my Mormon mission, we would get lists of everyone in the ward, and I would have wards where maybe only 1/3 of all the names on the list were people who actively attended church every Sunday. And so even though the church has many members, the number of those members who are attending every single Sunday, paying tithing, worshiping in all the ways you're expected to as a member, we don't really know the answer to that question. Utah, which is the #1 Mormon stronghold, is becoming less and less Mormon. It's no longer a majority Mormon, and Mormons are now at 42% of the state. So now not even half of the state of Utah is Mormon. There are different stats on church membership growth. In 2022, there were about 250,000 convert baptisms and several thousand more of children of record, which is children who are born to two parents who are already Mormon. That number was 93,000. This growth rate, though, is similar to population growth, and so the church is not exploding. I mean, growing up, we would talk about how the church is, soon there will be 20,000 whatever million members of the church. Everyone will be Mormon. That's what I expected as a kid. A 1.49 growth rate is not quite the explosive growth rate I would have expected as a child. It also says, according to the Cooperative Election Study, which has one of the largest samples of Latter-day Saints over time, the LDS share of the U.S. population used to be pretty consistently 1.8 or 1.9. In the most recent years, it has declined to a range of 1.1 to 1.3. And so, according to that study, Mormonism is on the decline, at least in the U.S. So the question, though, is, will the Mormon Church survive? Keep in mind the church has over $200 billion. So at least in the sense that there will always be some members, I think we can say that pretty definitively. They have a lot of money. They have enough members that it's not going to just die out after a single generation. Currently, there are approximately 67,000 Mormon missionaries out and about. Many Mormon missionaries go to different countries. There are 150 missions in Latin America alone. I didn't know this. Tonga is 60% Mormon, and Samoa is 40% Mormon, which is a huge percentage of the country. There's many missionaries who go there. Missionaries go basically to every country in the world that is both safe enough for them to go and that allows them to go. So China, for example, does not allow Mormon missionaries, as one example. Same with North Korea, many other countries that just don't even permit, even if the church wanted to send Mormon missionaries, they don't permit them to come. And so I think the church is considering not just their U.S. membership, but also considering how to expand to be more of a worldwide church, which is what they prefer to claim. One of the most common terms about Mormons are Mormon crickets, which is so funny. Mormon crickets aren't actually even crickets, they're katydids. This is a name that is given to these little pests that comes from the Mormon settlers coming to Utah in the mid-1800s. So basically the story goes that the pioneers were newly in Utah, newly in Salt Lake. A bunch of these katydids were eating all of their crops. They didn't have a ton of food. This was a dire situation, and after a lot of praying, seagulls came and ate all the bugs. Members have compared this to the plague of locusts in Egypt in the Bible, being saved from the locusts. It's also known as the miracle of the gulls, and this is why there is a seagull monument at the Temple Square in Salt Lake. This story, from what I can tell, has been embellished polished over time, added onto. It does sound like the gulls ate some of the bugs, but it sounds like it didn't exactly solve the situation. Back in the day, they were still having a lot of issues with the bugs eating their crops. People also ask, will Mormons marry non-Mormons, or will Mormons date non-Mormons? And this, I think, I just picture someone meeting their new crush at school and finding out their crush is Mormon and hurrying to go to Google and asking, will he date me or will she date me because she's Mormon? In my experience, no. Well, in my experience, dating outside the church was very discouraged. It's not a complete no, though. In my life, I have only ever dated people who were Mormon. My husband was Mormon when we got married. We got married in the temple, and then we left. So I never dated outside of my religion. Mormons do joke about flirt to convert, and so, if you meet someone who's not a member of the church, you may try to ask them if they want to get introduced to the Mormon missionaries, if they want to get baptized. In my Mormon mission, one of the people who got baptized while I was there was a young man who was dating a girl who was a member of the Mormon church, and then as a result, he got baptized and was a member. So I do think that the answer is yes, sometimes they will date. However, you're also told to date for marriage, so dating with marriage in mind. And you cannot get married to a non-member outside of the temple. And so it creates this incentive basically to not even bother dating somebody outside of your religion, because if you fall in love with them, then they can't take you to the temple, as they say, and then you won't be sealed with them for time and all eternity. You won't be sealed to your children. So accepting a date from a non-member is basically like saying you don't want to see your children in the afterlife, your future children. As a girl, you really grow up hearing all the time about your future companion, your future eternal companion. I found this lesson that is listed on the Mormon Church website that is titled Preparing to Become an Eternal Companion. I received so many lessons like this in the young women's youth group growing up. Prepare yourself spiritually, prepare yourself to be a good homemaker. As I was looking through this lesson plan, one of the quotes that they say that you're supposed to read to the young women who would be maybe between 12 and 18, President Spencer W. Kimball said, "I tell young women that they should do all in their power to make themselves attractive physically in dress and grooming." And he goes on about spirituality, etc. But it's crazy to me that in the Preparing to Become an Eternal Companion lesson, one of the specific things they mention is making sure you're pretty as part of being a good wife. I also have memories of writing letters to my future husband. At 12 years old, I'm writing letters to my future husband. When I asked my now real husband if he had to do that growing up as a Mormon boy, he said he never did anything like that. He's never writing letters to his future wife. I showed him, some of these lessons about preparing to be a wife. He said he never had any lessons about preparing to be a good husband. Their focus is all about honoring God and being a good priesthood holder. And women, I feel like you get a lot of lessons about being a good wife to the husband, and that's your role. And the triangle is very much wife to husband and husband to God. Another common question is about, of course, polygamy, which is something that everyone has questions about when it comes to Mormonism. Why do Mormons believe in polygamy, and can Mormons have multiple wives? Joseph Smith took his first wife as Fanny Alger in 1835. She was about 17, 18, 19, depending on what record you're reading. Joseph Smith would have been about 30 years old. This incident with Fanny Alger, though, was long before Joseph Smith revealed the doctrine of polygamy. It wasn't even officially practiced till the 1850s out in the open. Before that, they were totally secret, and it was officially ended in 1890, but I'll explain that it actually did not end in 1890 in the church either. My opinion, personally, is that Joseph Smith wanted to get with as many women as he could. He was with 11 women who were already married to other men when he was trying to convince them to marry him. 7 of the women that he married were underage, and the youngest was 14. I think that as he knew that he wanted to pursue this path in his life, he basically retroactively introduced the doctrine of polygamy. He talked about Moses, King David, and King Solomon had multiple wives or concubines in the Bible, and basically said, hey, this existed in the Bible. We need to restore this aspect. Jesus Christ, God himself spoke to me and said, we need to have polygamy as part of being the true church of Jesus Christ. And that's how polygamy becomes introduced into Mormon doctrine and then practiced through the decades. Polygamy is still in Mormon doctrine. It is in the Doctrine and Covenants, section 132. You all also asked which Mormon prophets practice polygamy, and part of this belief about polygamy, and this also exists still in the FLDS, who still practice polygamy, that the more wives you have, the more righteous you are, especially in the early church. And I have one final song for you. This song is called Latter-day Prophets, and it's basically a song that I learned in primary. You go to primary starting around 2 or 3, and this is a song I learned that helps you list every Mormon prophet that has ever been on the earth since Joseph Smith. And I'm going to maintain eye contact with the camera the whole time so that I'm not even reading the lyrics. I just know still, I've been out of the church for 8 years, I'm 31, but I still know all the prophets of the Mormon church up till when I left. Latter-day Prophets are number 1, Joseph Smith, then Brigham Young, John Taylor came 3rd, we know, then Wilford Woodruff, Lorenzo Snow, Joseph F. Smith, remember the F, Heber J. Grant, and George Albert Smith. David O. McKay was followed by Joseph Fielding Smith, then Harold Bealey, Spencer W. Campbell, Ezra Taft Benson, Howard W. Hunter, Gordon B. Hinckley, Thomas S. Monson. And now it's Russell M. Nelson, but I don't know the tune after that. Oh my gosh. So my thought is that if you can name in song every single one of the prophets that ever existed in your church, but you can't even do that with U.S. presidents, you might have been raised in a cult. To address common question about why Mormons always say the middle initial, it's because there were so many Joseph Smiths, Joseph F. Smith, Joseph Fielding Smith, 2 different people, normal Joseph Smith, founder of the church. There were so many Joseph Smiths that basically they started using the middle initial to clarify who they were talking about, and then that just stuck as kind of the naming convention since then. I'm going to show you all of the prophets that have practiced polygamy, along with how many wives they've had and how many children came from those polygamous relationships. So these, and I'm going to include as many photos as I can. These photos are kind of crazy because there's so many people in the photos. Joseph Smith had 33, approximately. Some say less, some say more. It seems like the numbers are always between about 30 and 40 wives. He died very young. Keep in mind, he had 11 children. 6 of those children died in infancy. 2 of those children were adopted. All of his children were from Emma. There's no proof that any children came from any of his polygamous relationships. Next, we have Brigham Young. He had 55 wives. He really had to one-up Joseph. From those 55 wives, he had 56 children. John Taylor had 9 wives and 34 children from those 9. Wilford Woodruff was the next prophet. He had 9 wives, 34 children. Lorenzo Snow was after him. 9 wives, 42 children. Joseph F. Smith, 6 wives, 45 children. Heber J. Grant, 3 wives, 12 children. The question I'm answering, obviously, is which Mormon prophets practice polygamy? And another question is which Mormon prophet ended polygamy? And that is a very interesting question because if you Google it, Wilford Woodruff ended polygamy, but if you were paying attention, 1, 2, 3 prophets after him still were living or polygamist in some way. So Lorenzo Snow after Wilford Woodruff, 9 wives, Joseph F., 6 wives, Heber J. Grant, 3 wives. Wilford ended polygamy in 1890, but that wasn't a full stop end. Keep in mind they were living in polygamy when the manifesto came out that they said they were going to stop polygamy. And so the United States government did not force them to break up the already existing polygamous relationships. They just said they would not be entering into any new polygamist relationships. Wilford Woodruff ended polygamy in 1890, but Joseph F. Smith was still living in polygamy till 1918, which is almost 30 years after that original declaration. Utah as a territory was not going to be permitted to enter into the United States till they gave up polygamy. And so part of this manifesto in 1890 said, "We are not teaching polygamy or plural marriage, nor permitting any person to enter into its practice." So that is carefully worded, right? It's basically saying we're not starting any new polygamous relationships, but we're also not going to break up the ones that already exist. So that's why we see polygamy continue to be practiced in the church 30 years after that manifesto, because those men were already married to those women. So they didn't perform any new marriages, but they also didn't break up existing polygamist relationships. If you are in the process of leaving the Mormon Church yourself, consider checking out my book, How to Leave the Mormon Church, an Ex-Mormon's Guide to Rebuilding After Religion. I wrote this as basically my own experience leaving the church, everything I learned, everything I wish I could have known as I was making my way out. Our final question is around all of the questions that get asked on Google about Mormons and sex and all of their weird loopholes they seemingly invent in order to be able to kind of have their cake and eat it too, so to say. There was a question about spotlighting, slim jimming, mounting, derfing, and of course, soaking, shaking the bed, all of those things. I think all of these terms are mostly Mormon myths that are invented by people who like the idea of coming up with these strange loopholes that probably will end up on some weird PORN site at some point. In all my conversations with all my female friends about this topic, from talking about it at girls' camp to BYU, I've never heard someone who said this to me. That's not to say it doesn't exist. It's just to say that that's why I consider it to be a Mormon myth. A lot of things that people talk about with the church that are questionable or crazy rules, I definitely have had quite a bit of experience with. These topics are all things that I feel like are salacious, that are just meant to get internet clicks. There's also a Mormon myth about how BYU students would go to Vegas, get married for one night, go through a drive-through chapel or whatever, get married, and then have sex that night, and then go the next day and get the marriage annulled in order basically just to have sex and still follow the rule of being married and living chastely. This myth to me falls along the same lines as the soaking myth or whatever other weird term we're gonna come up with next for Mormon sex loopholes. I do agree with the underpinning commentary about the Mormon attempt to avoid the rules or find loopholes so that they can do the thing without doing the thing. I talked about that with garments. I just know that when it comes to things like soaking, my personal opinion is that it's a myth, in the same way that BYU students running to Vegas to get married is a myth, in the way that Mormon culture and all cultures come up with a lot of myths that are fun things to tell over a cup of hot chocolate with your Mormon friends, and ultimately aren't really rooted in any sort of real reality that's widespread. A reminder to like this video, subscribe to my channel, drop a comment if you have questions about Mormons, and consider checking out my Patreon, where you could have had this video ad-free and early for the Patreon members over there. The link is in the description box below, and as always, I will see you all next week.